Hello, everyone. I'm Blake Melton. I've been doing my best to lead the efforts at Standing Buoy the past few years. And this is going to be a video or presentation on trail maintenance. So let me get some slides up for us to look at, and we'll get going. So what we need to do out there or these activities are the main ones. We need corridor maintenance, getting rid of down limbs and trees and cutting back new growth. We need to maintain our grade reversals to help water get off the trail. We need to armor any problematic drains that are getting mucky and losing compaction. We need to deal with seeps, which are those areas that are lengthy, wet areas that just seem to stay wet. We need to prevent head cutting, and I'll explain what that is when we get there. So corridor maintenance is really easy. When limbs and trees fall, this happens all year long, we get them off the trail. We use hand saws wherever possible. A lot of times it's easier to get to spend less effort getting into it with a large hand saw and then using elbow grease to get it than it is to carry a chainsaw back to where the tree is. Y'all can help us with this. It's easy to ride with a folding handsaw in your pack, especially after we know we've had high winds. If there's something that you can't get with a handsaw, if you'll drop a pin and contact us, then we'll get out there and get the bigger things handled. And you can do that through social media or trails@standingbuoy.org. And then spring growth is an annual thing, whereas these trees are sprouting new limbs, et cetera, we need to cut those back. We really hadn't had to do much of this because the corridor was cut freshly, pretty wide to build the trails. But as the years go by, that'll become more of an annual spring activity. So corridor clearing this is obviously the corridor. We've got the trail tread, but we need to keep a big enough area where you're not getting hit and smacked with limbs and branches. These are the tools: folding handsaw, loppers, clippers. Everybody should be pretty familiar with those. So grade reversals. This is a little bit less intuitive, but we need to clear them and deburn them. So when the trail's built and it's going downhill from here down, these reversals, every time it kicks up in gradient, it dumps water off because water doesn't flow uphill. And this helps keep this, it prevents this where the water gets on the trail and stays on the trail, which causes erosion. We want this low area, we want the water to come down into it and get off the trail. The success of this happening depends on there being an outslope. So the tread, even though it may feel flat, optimally is 5% outslope. And there are some insloped turns out there. Don't worry about those. They're intended to be that way, but at the bottom of these grade reversals, there are drains, we need to have an outslope. What happens is we build, the trail builders build it with the outslope, but then everybody uses it. And hikers and runners and bikers are generally traveling down the middle of the trail. So we get compaction in the middle of the trail and we get, sort of debris, the dirt moves a little bit to the outside and we get this profile, which causes a berm, thus deburring. It causes this. It causes that runs down, it hits the berm, it stays on the trail, and then these grade reversals, the bottom of these drains starts to collect water, and then they get mushy and muddy and they lose compaction and they're a problem. So, and then fortunately, before I get into what we did, those of you who've been to trail building schools or participated in work days, you hear things about rolling grade dips and nicks. And We really don't have to do that because those are all efforts to create grade reversals on older trails that weren't designed with grade reversals. So we're not really needing to nick or create rolling grade dips. We're just needing to clear our grade reversals and deburn them. And the tools for that are sort of these metal rakes and a robust hoe. And rogue hoe is sort of the gold standard. We have lots of these tools for use at work days. So when we rake, we're going to clear the leaves and organic matter out of that drain. At the bottom of the grade reversal, at the low point, we can clean the leaves and organic matter off the trail. And up to 6 feet below the trail, because if we get all the leaf cover out, not only does it help water get across the trail, it also helps that the dirt that is that low point it helps the moisture to evaporate out of it. What we don't want to rake is we don't want to rake the back slope, and we don't want to rake the tread that's sloped, that's coming down to that low point. We want to leave the leaves and organic matter on there. They get ground up because the trails are heavily used, and they help protect the dirt during the winter and help prevent erosion. The same thing on the back slope. Deburring is we're going to use that hoe to scrape and shave that berm off of the tread. We're not digging. We're only looking for that 5-degree outslope. If we dig, we may try to dig below the trail to help the water continue on its way, but we're having a very light touch on the trail itself, and we're doing sort of a half moon shape below the trail. We don't want to do something narrow and deep because it'll just fill back up. That half moon shape below the trail produces the best results. So when we talk about clearing drains or raking and deburring, that's what we're doing. Drains and seeps. When I'm saying drain, I'm talking about something that looks like what's on the left, where you've got a very clear, narrow sort of seasonal stream, drainage, whatever you want to call it, that's coming across the trail. What's on the right is this long problem area on Lonely Hunter that's just wet. And if there's no real drainage coming in, it's just a long stretch of trail that's staying wet. And that is a seep. So these drains, as I said, some of this already, characterized by a narrow path across the trail. There's lots of flow and erosion. When you look uphill, you're going to see a gully that the flow is eating into the hillside. These are fairly simple to deal with. The seeps, extended wet section, when you look up, there's no obvious gully. They're caused by terracing and grass, really, and they're more complicated to deal with. So I did this illustration myself. On the left is ideal. All the trails, they're not built to the bottom of slopes, they're built on side slopes to help with drainage. And when we have a nice, consistent and steep side slope, and we don't have a lot of grass, the water gets off the hillside quickly. It runs to the bottom and the trail's dry. On the right, if we have some of this flat area here, this is the trail right here, flat area above it and lots of grass. The grass holds the water, acts like a sponge. These flat areas capture the water as it runs down the hill and it soaks in. And then it gradually seeps out onto our trail. And so the flat area can do this all by itself. The grass can do it all by itself, but you get this in a combination and it produces these really problematic seeps. So this is going back to the differences of the drain. Up here, we're going to see above the drain, this on the right, this kind of gully, generally sort of a V shape where there's watershed coming down into the bottom of the V and then running in a fairly narrow path across the trail. This is uphill of a seep. You can see there's no gully, there's no V shape, but what there is flat to moderate slope in grass. So this is the problem area on Lonely Hunter, where we're having prolonged sections of wet trail. And you can see the trail, the picture on the left, you can see the trail here, and this is what it looks like above it. This is turned a little bit more above it, and you can see the flatness in the grass. This is 180 degrees with the extended stretches of wet trail behind me, and you're walking along and then suddenly you get to this nice dry trail. Well, you look uphill and you have a nice, steep, consistent slope, and you don't have as much grass and other stuff to hold the water on the hillside. So obviously the Trail Solutions guys know this, but they could design around it to some extent, but there are just certain areas that the trail had to go through where we have this terracing. It doesn't always produce a problem, but sometimes it does. So that's difference between a drainage, an active drainage, and a seep. The drainages are pretty easy. We're not going to armor every drainage. This drain could use maybe a little bit of work down here on head cutting, which we'll get to, but if it's nice and firm underfoot, it's not creating any problems with the trail, we're going to leave this alone. We want to spend time and effort other places. And then especially on the green trail, if we armor every single drain, it's going to be hard to keep that green trail feeling really green and feeling accessible to lots of different skill levels. So when the drain is a problem, like this one was, we don't want to do this. And I say that at the same time, I say thank you to whomever did this, because they saw a problem and they tried to fix it. I've done this plenty of times until the Trail Solutions guys told me we shouldn't be doing this. What happens is all this stuff rots really quick, and so it's really organic and soft, and it gets rid of the mud in the short term, but it exacerbates the problem in the long term. So the correct way to fix this is to really dig out, and you can see here where Willie's dug. I mean, we've dropped the trail right there, probably a foot. And then we're using these large rocks that we found nearby. They go in, and then we create something that looks like this, that's going to be a permanent fix. So to do this, like I said, we're gathering the rock. We're very fortunate on that property that there's a lot of rock, so it makes these things easy to deal with. We've got a number of these bags that you see. And normally when we're using bigger rocks, you get one or two in a bag, you take 2 bags, and it's easy to go out and find the rocks and get them back to where we need to work. And then again, we're using the Rogue hoe for digging, and then a transfer shovel, a flat nose shovel, to move dirt around. So when we talk about armoring and you come to a work day, you'll be hunting rock and toting rock, and then we'll be digging and putting the rock in place. So the keys are to preserve the low point. If we just put rocks on top of the problem, the water is going to migrate around the rocks. Gravity applies on the property, so water is going to find the low point. And if we don't create a low point where we're going to armor, it's not going to be effective. The rocks, again, need to be to grade. They need to be buried in the trail, so there's a seamless transition. And for active drains, we need to use large rocks, especially at the bottom of the tread. Otherwise, they're just going to wash away. It's impressive when it really rains, the force of the water coming through. We want open joints so that the water can flow between the rocks, and those joints are going to be perpendicular to the trail or parallel to the way the water's flowing. So we get the water across the trail. Seeps are a little bit trickier. It's really hard to armor 10 feet or more of trail. And especially on the green trail, it's really hard to do that and keep the trail green. So the first thing we're going to try to do is to try to focus the water, to try to narrow down the section of the trail that's staying wet. A lot of times with these seeps, if you explore the back slope, you can find somewhere that is incredibly soft and mushy. And that is generally where a lot of the water in the seep is coming from. It's almost, you can think of it a little bit like an underground spring almost. And there we want to create low points or little mini grade reversals and at those chief sort of seeps or flows in the back slope, and see if we can get the water to focus into those low points, and we can then armor those. If we're successful with focusing the water, then we only need to armor those low points. We can find enough native rock nearby. We can use smaller rock because we don't have a very forceful or very high volume of flow. And generally we want to bury the rock, because if we use small rock and we sit it on top, it may work fine for right now, but when summer gets here and everything gets really dry and hard, that rock's going to start popping out and not staying put. If we're unsuccessful with focusing it, then that's where we get into using gravel. And for that, we need to wait till the trails are dry enough that we can drive sort of can think of it as a little wheelbarrow on bulldozer tracks that we can transport the gravel in to address those areas. Again, we try to avoid doing that whenever possible, not only because it takes a lot of time and energy, but also because it just doesn't feel very natural. But sometimes you got to get from point A to point B to connect everything. This is an example of focusing. On the left is an old road crossing on the section of Lonely Hunter near the lake. And this whole thing was incredibly sloppy. And you can see that here and here, we tried to create two low points. Hopefully this is going to dry out. The water is going to focus in these two low points. And then in all likelihood, we'll need to armor those two low points. This is a section on Bimini that's been a problem since the trail opened. Again, trying to identify two low points, hopefully in the middle, in the sides, dry out. And the armoring we did here is effective. This is one of the low points on Bimini, and you can already see, it's hard to see a little bit in the picture, but this is one of the areas where we're getting a lot of flow out of the back slope. And you can already see in just the 2 minutes this has been dug, the water starting to come in and pool up. You can also see now that we've got a lot of slope coming down to this low point, you can see some of the water up here trying to migrate down to the bottom. Hopefully this will work and we won't need to bring in gravel. That brings us to head cutting. So waterfalls that are not based on rock move back upstream every year, because as the water flows and comes over the fall, it eats away in the back, and this moves further and further and further upstream. This is on Doughboy. It's been long since fixed, but it is a very dramatic example of head cutting. Obviously, the trail wasn't built like this. The edge of the trail was out here and it head cut back. This is obviously that same one, and this is a view from below. Now, most of the head cutting out there is not this extreme because most of the drains like this are already armored, but we still need to do it. And this is a pretty good example. These could be a little bit buried and more secure in the ground, but we really want the water to come across and seamlessly flow over the tops of these, which is going to prevent it from cutting a trench back up into our trail. So head cutting seems a little silly or even unnecessary, but it's really important. It prevents the head cutting from coming back up into the trail and causing us to need to armor the whole drain. So it saves a lot of time and energy when we can preserve the tread with a little bit of armoring below it rather than having to armor the whole thing. And again, on the green trails, if we armor every single drain, it's going to stop feeling green. So we need to get on top of the head cutting, and there's still a number of places out there that we need to address. For minor head cutting, like I said, the rocks go to grade, dug and buried below the edge of the trail, so we get the water seamlessly flowing over the trail and over the tops of the rocks. If it's major head cutting, if there's a lot of flow coming through, we need to do what's called riprap above the trail. It's a lot of rocks sort of haphazardly buried, half to 1/3 buried, and it filters and slows down the water. And some of the time, we'll put some large flat rocks on each side as paddles to try to keep the water coming through the riprap and slowing it all down so it doesn't have as much velocity to eat into the trail. And then we're going to need to do more rock below the trail. So here, instead of just some of this, if it was steeper and faster and more head cutting, we need more rock below here, and we need to use some bigger rock, especially on the bottom. So how all this fits into sort of an annual rhythm of maintenance is fall and early winter, we need to clean and deburn the grade reversals. We need to identify problematic drainages and seeps. And then during the winter, we need to armor the drainages and address the seeps. Spring is generally going to be cutting back growth into the trail corridor. And then all year long, we're clearing fallen limbs and trees. And then as new trail comes online, even though it's not fall or winter, we may need to do some of the fall and winter things to help that new trail. So the frequency and importance of grade reversal maintenance of raking and deburring. Fall and early winter, we need to rake at least once. We need to deburm a few times. Deburring and how much we have the trail open are very closely related. The raking and deburring prevents problem areas. And then once we've done that, if we're a little bit aggressive with keeping the trails open, then we're going to need to come back and deburn more regularly, because we're going to, some of those drains are going to be soft, and when they're soft, we get a lot of burning. So if we can start having and we've had good participation in work days and we've gotten a lot done, but if we can have better participation, more people coming regularly and really knowing what to do so that we can deburn very efficiently, it'll help us be more aggressive with keeping the trails open through the winter. On armoring and seeps, this is the chief volunteer component of professionally built trails. The raking and the deburring is like changing the oil in your car. I mean, that just has to happen as regular maintenance. But this is much more like trail building, the armoring and the addressing the seeps. And it's the chief thing volunteers do, because they can't know which drains are going to be problematic or where the seeps are going to pop up. The vast majority of drains out there are not a problem. And there are a lot of flat terraced areas that are not a problem. So the only way to really know is to build a trail, and then the problems rear their heads, and then we as volunteers need to come in and resolve them. The thing I love about armoring and the seeps is it's permanent and it's cumulative. So we don't have to do it every year if we do it right. And every year, the more we armor and the more we address the seeps, the more durable the trail gets, and the more we're going to be able to keep it open. And a final important point is, this is not just about being able to open the trail in January and February. The more we armor and the more we address seeps, it may mean that in the spring and summer and fall, we may have to close the trail after some rains, or maybe we can open the trail back up in half the time that we otherwise would have been able to open it up. So this is not just about 2 months out of the year or 3 months out of the year. This is a huge benefit all year long, and being able to keep the trails open and use them a lot. So when we are going through and raking and deburring, and then sometimes we just walk the trails and look, but we're using this app, this Evenza app that the trail builders use to drop pins. So these red pins are places that need to be dealt with immediately. Orange are kind of watch. And then these green are areas with lots of rock caches. There's a lot of rock everywhere, but they're just these mark places where there's a ton of rock that's really easy to get. So if we zoom in, each of these pins is labeled, and then there's pictures. So we know, we've got this creek, which is firm and not a problem, except we're starting to get like head cutting on the high side and some pooling. And this needs to be addressed to get flow across and add some rock. The other section that's close by are these two extended seeps, which are going to be a bear to deal with because they're long and they're not even flat. This one is not flat. So they're going to be tricky and take a whole lot of work. But by having this, we kind of know where we need to go, and we know if there's rock close by, we can get there and do the work. And then rather than walking the trail and looking for the next spot, we know where the next spot is. We can cut through the woods and get there quick. So that's what we're doing when we have trail work days and we talk about doing trail work and trail maintenance. Please be on the lookout for work days on Facebook and Instagram. Wear long pants and durable shoes. Waterproof boots will serve you very well. Bring a hydration pack and snacks. A lot of the times we're going to go into the woods and be in the woods on the move for a few hours, and bring gloves. And again, we've got to establish a culture of accountability among the avid trail users so that showing up at work days and helping out is just a part of trail use. And it's something that everybody that's using the trail a lot does. So thanks for listening. Hope to see you at the next trail workday.